Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this important discussion on navigating new trade realities, balancing globalization, regionalization, and national interests. Today, we are honored to have Juan Carlos Sosa, a seasoned leader with a remarkable career spanning diplomacy, government, and the private sector. Juan Carlos is also a valued member of the Board of Advisors for the Center for Global Business at McCombs. His insights and experience from negotiating free trade agreements to driving transformative change make him uniquely qualified to speak to us about the pressing challenges facing today's global trade landscape. As we navigate an era marked with shifting global connections, rising nationalism, and evolving trade policies, our discussion tonight will seek to shed light on the critical topics such as challenges in global logistics, the potential impact of tariffs, and the opportunities presented by nearshoring and onshoring trends. We will also explore how these dynamics shape the global economy and what strategies leaders and nations can adopt to thrive in this new reality. Juan Carlos, thank you for joining us tonight.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started because we have an hour, and I know that the questions that I've prepared this evening will really seek to dig deep into the topic, and I'm sure we'll have some questions from the people that are connected this evening. So let's get started by hearing about your background. Could you share some of your key moments from your diplomatic and private sector career that have shaped your perspective on global trade and business, please?
Sure. Well, first of all, welcome. I'm a proud alumni of the Moody's Communication School. I come from a long line of Longhorns too. My father is an alumni, my brother, and my nephew is a current student at UT, so we're third generation Texas alumni. Talk about my career. It's almost 28 years already between private and government sector. In the private sector, I've worked in different industries such as retail, technology, distribution, and hospitality. I have an extensive knowledge of the Latin American market, being in different regional marketing roles in multinational companies such as Samsung Electronics and Dell, where I oversaw most of the Latin American countries in different roles. In my experience in government, it's basically the last 5 years, I was the Vice Minister of Foreign Trade of the Republic of Panama for almost 4 years. And then I was the Consul General of Panama in Antwerp, Belgium. As Vice Minister, my role was basically to promote Panamanian exports of Panamanian products, also attract foreign direct investment into the country, negotiate commercial treaties with other countries, and also promote special economic zones such as free trade zones and the multinational headquarters regime in Panama, which is basically made to attract multinational companies to the Republic of Panama.
Right. That's very interesting. And so, sort of taking the guide from your, obviously as Vice Minister in Panama and your work as a diplomat for Panama, let's talk a little bit about Panama in and of itself. So Panama has often been a focal point in discussions of global logistics, but let's try to step back a bit, and I want to see how you could if you could tell me, how do you see trade evolving in the face of challenges such as climate change, geopolitical changes and tensions, and the rise of alternate trade routes, which have been spoken about going through the north, and other canals that people have spoken about? And what trends should global trade leaders prioritize when ensuring competitiveness?
Okay. That's a very long question, Robert. So I'm gonna try to split it in different parts. I'm gonna start with climate change, and this is something that is really all over the news. We've seen what President Trump said about acquiring Greenland from Denmark, and that has a specific reason because as the ice melts in the North Pole, more trade routes will be opening, and whoever controls these trade routes will have a definite competitive advantage. That's one. And the second reason is as the ice melts, you're going to start to see a lot of minerals coming out that are potential minerals that are used for example, electric cars. That's what batteries of electric cars use: lithium, copper. You also see rare minerals that are used in semiconductors, for example. So that's a direct cause of climate change. Now you're starting to see the importance of a place such as Greenland because of opening of trade routes and special and rare minerals that are in high demand today. The other aspect that I see of climate change that will have a huge impact on trade is the alternative use of energy and fuel. For example, you have SAF, which is sustainable aviation fuel, LNG. These types of fuels are starting to be used to compensate for the use of fossil fuels due to global warming. And this will have a direct repercussion in trade, but also in agriculture, transportation, and shipping. For example, airlines, they have to start compensating for their fossil fuel usage by 2030. And right now, there's not enough SAF fuel that airlines can buy and compensate for that. So it's gonna change a lot of the dynamics of the economy as industries and transportation starts to migrate to more sustainable fuel due to climate change. So in regards to the geopolitical aspect, I see that more and more countries are starting to align their trade and economic policies according to their political views. One example can mention, for example, Russia now partnering with North Korea, not only on economic cooperation, but also on military cooperation. As we all know now, there are North Korean troops fighting the war with Ukraine. We also have geopolitical tensions between the US and China. Obviously, this generates a lot of uncertainty and challenges to countries and companies that operate on a global scale. Another huge threat that we've been hearing is the situation between China and Taiwan. Because what would happen if China invades Taiwan? Through the Taiwan Strait, 50% of all container ships in the world go through there. So imagine if you had a situation there, basically half of container ships will need to look for an alternate trade route because there will be no way of passing through that strait. So what can companies, countries do with all of this uncertainty to remain competitive? You need to keep investing in technology. Now you have artificial intelligence, robotics. You need to reduce costs. You need to start regionalizing operations, especially now with geopolitical events. You need to optimize distribution. You need to reduce shipping times. You need to move operations to onshoring or nearshoring, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. but also you need to provide your companies more flexibility in reaching markets. You need to be creative in bypassing possible tariffs. We've been seeing the tariff situation all over the news, the recent situation in Mexico, Colombia, and Canada. And finally, my last recommendation, you need to get people to understand international business and culture. Uh, you need to have local people adapt to local needs and see the business on a global scale. This is very important because sometimes we get so entrenched in our domestic view of things, but you need people with international experience that can see how everything works on a global scale more than on a domestic scale.
Thank you so much, Juan Carlos. That's incredible insights. I mean, you know, your comment about 50% of the containers that are traded worldwide pass through the Taiwan Strait. That is incredible. And like you say, I mean, issues associated with climate change, geopolitical tensions, the need to reduce costs, all of those things obviously require that companies do proper risk management and provide flexibility when it comes to trade globally. And you mentioned two things earlier when you were responding to the question. One of them was nearshoring and onshoring. So with global trends shifting towards both nearshoring and onshoring to improve supply chain resilience, what role can countries like Panama, with their strategic locations, play in adapting to these shifts? And how do you see these trends impacting the broader global trade ecosystem, particularly, again, in the light of these geopolitical tensions that you mentioned just a second ago?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think more and more now countries as a strategy and companies are starting to regionalize and even bring back home some activities that were done either abroad or very far away from the end consumer market. And I'm going to go back a couple of years ago. We all know we had a great trade shock with the pandemic, where shipping costs went through the roof. A container from China used to cost, I don't know, $2,000, $3,000. It went up almost to $20,000 a couple of years ago. And then we got hit with the war in Ukraine, where we had fuel costs go up. So there were all these disruptions to the supply chain that it made companies and countries rethink how they do business. So countries right now are looking to bring investment back home. We're seeing it in the US, or working with friendly countries where they can collaborate or do nearshoring. One example of this is the CHIPS Act, was signed by the US, in which they want to strengthen the semiconductor supply chain, be more resilient, and bring manufacturing of semiconductors back home, not depending on, for example, on China. And then also considering countries specifically in the Indo-Pacific region, say Korea, Japan, but also in the Americas as possible allies. For example, Costa Rica and Panama are part of this select group of countries that are part of this CHIPS Act. The idea is, for example, in Costa Rica and Panama, you could assembly the semiconductors and reship them to the US. From Panama, it's very short shipping time. It's only 5 days from Panama to Miami, and through the airport is basically it's two hours to 2.5 hours to Miami. So you start reducing those times. You start depending less on countries that might not align with your political views. So that's a trend that I think it's going to continue. In the case of Panama and any other country that has a privileged geographic location, it's definitely an opportunity. From Panama, U.S. companies could distribute goods or services to all major markets in the Americas because, as I mentioned, we have an airport that from Panama, you can be in less than 7 hours to any city in North America or South America. You also have, obviously, the Panama Canal. You can connect the Atlantic and the Pacific just less than a day. So Panama can definitely take advantage from this. The other opportunity that Panama can exploit is that Panama has more than 20 commercial and free trade agreements with the major markets in the world. We have agreements with the US, the European Union, South Korea, Israel, and using the special economic zones in Panama, free trade zones, the multinational headquarters regimes, you can import products or raw materials, convert them and re-export them. And at the same time, you can import qualified professionals that can work legally in Panama to undertake sophisticated manufacturing or sophisticated activities. So this is definitely something that it's an opportunity for countries like Panama. And also, now that we're talking about tariffs and trade barriers, for example, if the U.S. Now has a increased tariff in China, companies from the U.S. could come to Panama, build products there, made in Panama, and ship them to China at lower tariffs. So there's definitely advantages and ways to bypass the increase of tariffs on specific countries.
Sorry, very interesting. And before we get more into the tariff discussion, which is, I think, it's one of the questions that I want to ask you, I'm just going to sidestep for a second here, and I want to ask you a little bit about the SEM law, or I think you called it multinational headquarter regime law that exists in Panama. I know there are other laws similar to that, for example, in Costa Rica and other countries. Can you just talk very, very briefly about what that law entails and how does it benefit either Panama or the companies?
Sure. So Panama is a hub for multinational companies. It's basically a headquarters for companies that have regional operations throughout Latin America and even on a worldwide scale. So what this regime does, it provides certain incentives to companies in terms of tax, in terms of the ability of importing qualified professionals to work in Panama legally. And it's basically just being in Panama and being in a very advanced logistically and infrastructure country provides the connectivity necessary for these companies to easily hop on a plane and visit different markets in South America, in the Caribbean, Mexico, etc. So it's very attractive. You see all the major companies in the world here from the US. You have Dell. Dell has a huge operations here, both a contact center and also a marketing and sales operation with over 2,000 people. Companies like Samsung, Under Armour, they all operate here out of Panama on a regional scale. And you even have companies such as Nestle, where they do all their procurement on a global scale out of Panama.
Right, right. Yeah, it is amazing to see how if you put in place the right legal regime, you can attract foreign direct investment and see multinational companies establishing themselves and their headquarters in some of these Latin American countries that are so close to the U.S. and some of the larger economies. Let's go back to the tariff discussion because you mentioned it earlier in your response. So tariffs have become a significant point of discussion in recent years, and particularly with rising protectionism and sort of the shifting trade policies that we're seeing in the different countries. From a global perspective, how do tariffs impact international trade and the movement on goods? And how can countries balance their domestic industry protection with the benefits of open trade?
Okay. So we've seen lately, so this is tariffs are all over the news. We've seen that tariffs not only affect trade, but we're seeing that they also affect diplomatic relations. They have an effect on inflation and the overall economy of countries. Recently, we saw President Trump using tariffs or the possibility of increasing tariffs against Colombia, Mexico, and Canada for different reasons, not necessarily related to trade, but related to, for example, immigration, to um, the, the the frontier between Mexico and Panama to reduce the influx of illegal drugs and immigrants. So it's not only a tool for trade, it has different connotations and effects on countries. I will say, and I will go now more into detail, that tariffs definitely can negatively have an effect on export goods of other countries. They make them less competitive in a market. Once you raise the entry of a product, obviously the price of that product increase and is less attractive and less competitive in that market. Why do countries do this? Usually to protect their own industries or sectors, especially sensitive sectors in agriculture, for example. I'm going to give you some cases that are quite peculiar. The car industry, for example, it's very important in the US and the European Union as a whole. And everybody knows that the Chinese car manufacturing industry is growing a lot. It's now one of the big players in the world in terms of car sales. And basically, in the US and European Union, the tariffs are so high that these cars cannot get into these markets. I mean, it's completely prohibited for Chinese brands to enter these markets. That's different in Latin America. For example, Chinese cars are flooding the market and are really hurting the more traditional Japanese and Korean brands that have established their presence for decades in Latin America. So in regards to tariffs, obviously they work better for bigger countries because they have stronger muscle in establishing high tariffs, because smaller countries or markets can counteract by doing the same. It's not the same if Panama, for example, exports, let's say, $100 million to the US in goods, but the US exports to Panama $4 billion. If we increase tariffs from our side, it's not really going to make a dent to the US because they have much bigger market, China, Europe, Mexico, Brazil. But for us, it definitely, if a big market blocks our exports, we'll definitely feel the impact on our side because we don't have that many options to allocate those products. So in terms of inflation, definitely if you raise tariffs, it has a negative impact on the price of goods. It can generate less competition in markets, but at the same time, it can protect sensitive industries. in respective countries. We already mentioned, for example, the car industry. So how do you have a balance, let's put it that way, between managing tariffs, but at the same time protecting that key industries or sectors in your country? From my own experience, I had the opportunity to negotiate two free trade agreements. One was with South Korea, and the other one was with Israel. Israel, you may know, it's huge exporter of agricultural goods. They've done a wonderful job in creating technology for agriculture. So in the case of Israel, we protected, or we didn't include some of our sensitive products, for example, chicken, meat, and some other agricultural products into the agreement. They were outside of the agreement, but basically let's say 97% of the rest of the products, they were included in the agreement, because they were products that we either not compete or we didn't produce. So in the case of Panama, it's a very free trade economy. But within the last couple of years, we started protecting some of these sensitive industries and sectors, because they were shrinking and shrinking, and we were losing jobs. And in the case of South Korea, the same. We don't have any problems with cars entering with preferential tariffs or electronics, but then we had some issues, obviously, with the sensitive products. But I also want to talk, there are tariffs, but there's always some cases that countries use, let's say, non-tariff barriers to block trade. And I'm going to also talk about an experience I have with Costa Rica. Costa Rica, it's a master in blocking products from other countries, but not with tariffs, but what I would like to call finding the hair on the soup. They use their different sanitary authorities, customs, to try to find the dot on the, or the missing comma on the documents, the test on a specific product. And with that, they create a bureaucratic black hole, where basically the process is endless, and you get tired of trying to export. So this is something that you can disguise. You can say, hey, I'm not blocking trade. It's not a tariff, but you use your bureaucratic government machinery to delay, to stop the free flow of trade coming into a country. So so what can countries do? What companies do? I think in the times we're living right now, globalization is starting to take a little bit of a backseat, and we'll start seeing more regionalization. I think trade will be aligned in some cases more with countries that share the same political views. This might change if the geopolitical aspect stabilizes a little bit more. But as I see right now, with the current situation with Russia, the US, and China, the European Union blocking access of Chinese goods, I think it's going to take some time for the world to regain again its global trade footing.
Super interesting. So, I mean, it's incredible to see how just 10 years ago, the buzzword in trade was globalization, right? Everything was globalization. And now geopolitical tensions, as I hear it from you, seems to be an important driver to move away from globalization and more towards regionalization, and trade really being more aligned with political views, which kind of doesn't really make sense. But given the geopolitical ambiance that we have in the world right now, it's obviously driving the agenda. Um, I'd like to get into a question regarding protectionism, but before we do that, I just want to ask you, from your experience in having negotiated free trade agreements, and then your comment about using other tools that are not necessarily tariffs, which of the two do you find to be more effective by countries actually establishing tariffs or using these more subtle mechanisms to block trade, based on your experience in
So
both?
yeah, uh, so tariffs, you can go to court, to international courts. Let's say the WTO, which is not very functional right now because you can submit a case to the WTO, but then if you appeal that, it goes into kind of like a void because the US right now is not appointing judges. So it basically takes a permanent slip in the WTO. And Panama has a case right now against Costa Rica because of that. Costa Rica kept blocking Panamanian products, kept blocking Panamanian products. So we started playing some offense as well, and we blocked their dairy and meat products using the same arguments that they use, that they didn't have the necessary sanitary conditions to access the market. So it's right now it's under appeal at the WTO, but that's the risk with tariffs. You can get into the WTO, or you can get into another international arbitrage organization. But with these other subtle mechanisms, you can disguise tariffs, but on a different way. It can also be subject to an arbitration, but it's harder to prove because a tariff, it's a tariff. You can also use quotas, limit the amount of product, and we've done that in the past. For example, we did that with pork from the US. We limited the quotas of pork that could get into Panama, and that's pretty effective. We've done that with Colombia as well, with coffee. So there's different mechanisms to kind of control the influx of products because, as you know, sometimes countries also dump products on other countries. And if you're not careful, you can destroy a whole sector or industry that where people have jobs and the economy depends on. So it's a fine balance.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That's incredibly insightful. Going back a little bit to the sort of geopolitical tensions and regionalization, and that with the return of leadership styles emphasizing protectionism, which is what we've been talking about, such as renegotiating, trade agreements and advocating for, in the case of the US, America First policies, what do you see as the long-term implications for global trade dynamics given this new trend? And do you think these shifts create opportunities for healthier competition, or do they really risk fragmenting the global system and undermining multilateral cooperation?
So let me start first with protectionism, and I'm going to give my personal opinion. I think protectionism works when you have to negotiate with countries that have double standards, and most of countries do this in regards to international trade. They might say, yeah, we're an open market, free trade, but then they're blocking some specific products from other countries. And we had these issues, especially with the European Union. They were very pushy on trying to push their products. Their ambassadors were great. Every day they will go to the ministry to push their European products into Panama. but then you see them blocking Chinese cars with 100% tariffs. So that double standard, when you are dealing with these types of situations, then it merits using some degree of protectionism to protect sensitive sectors of your economy, especially for Latin America, on the agricultural sectors. As I mentioned, we did this with Costa Rica, Colombia. We had some issues also with Peru, where they basically were not letting our products in. So we started protecting some of our products from European exports through same, not approving. The game here is the approval of, in case of agricultural products, approval of plants. You have to, it's not like you approve, okay, you can export meat and that's it. No, you have to approve each plant, each exporting plant of meat. So that plant has the requirements necessary to enter the market. So it's not just generic products, it's by plant. The same with dairy. You approve, for example, a cheese manufacturing plant, an ice cream manufacturing plant. If this plant manufacture different products, then you approve the plant as a whole. But and that's how you do it, because you also have to send your inspectors to the other country. And you can say, no, we have a long list before we go to Peru. It could take 4 years for your inspection. So those are tricks of the trade if you want to kind of protect some of your sectors. But I don't think it's sustainable in the long term. I am a firm believer in free trade, but with a certain degree of protectionism. So yeah, the other part of this question, protectionism, it definitely generates some level of uncertainty, stress, and definitely challenges that create barriers that prevent trade to flow smoothly, and creates problems for countries or companies that cannot adapt quickly enough to undertake situations like this. I have an example. When I was in Belgium, in Antwerp. Antwerp has the second largest port in Europe in regards to movement of containers, but it's the largest hub for fuel, energy, and chemicals. So when the war started in Russia, in Ukraine, as you all know, there were tariffs, bans, all the trade impairments you can think of against Russia. So one of the biggest buyer, or probably the biggest buyer of gas from Russia is Germany. So when there was a ban on Russian gas, Germany had a huge problem. And that's when countries and companies have to adapt quickly. So I was talking with the executive of the Port of Antwerp, which I have a good relationship with, and they explained to me how they pivot in order to fix this critical situation for one of the biggest economies in the world. They struck important alliances, for example, with the Port of Houston. And as we all know, Texas is a huge supplier of LNG. And then through these alliances and through these relationships between the Port of Antwerp, the Port of Houston, they started shipping the LNG from Houston to Antwerp, and from Antwerp through small ships through the river all the way to Germany and pipelines. And they solve a potential disastrous situation in Germany by then aligning with partners or countries that share political views. In this case, in the case of obviously Europe and the US, they share, say, the same political view, at least in the past administration, and they solve a potential disastrous problem in Germany. So I think this is a great example of, yeah, when you have geopolitical situations, protectionism, tariffs, you need to think a little bit outside of your of the box, and then you have to see who your allies are and build upon those relationships to come up with great solutions to avert potential trade problems or problems in the supply chain.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. That's extremely insightful. We're running. I need to keep an eye on the clock as well, but I do want to open up to questions to people that are connected today. So I'd like to invite, if anybody has any question, please share it on the chat. I think we can probably accommodate two questions, and then I have a final question, which I'm going to give you a bit of a heads up on what it is, Juan Carlos, and I'm going to ask you to give us some of the students in the IB program some advice or some recommendations of what you think are things they should focus on as they sort of develop their university career and onwards. So let me just see here. Let's give it just 1 second here to see if there's any question. If not, I'll go into my question. I'll give it a few seconds. But in the meantime, oh, here we go. I have one question here from Hardhick, and it says the following. How can we as students start thinking about and experiencing global cultures to be prepared for the global market?
Okay, I think I might go a little bit as a whole into some recommendations for students, but my advice is for any business endeavor that you undertake right now, you always need to think globally, because the world is shrinking. You need to have a global view, but you always need to execute locally. So if you start thinking globally, definitely you need to start traveling. You need to get out of that comfort zone, that domestic view of things. The more you travel, the more you get to experience different cultures, different ways of doing business, different economies. So I would say that travel, think globally, execute locally, and any business endeavor that you undertake, always think of the potential of going globally.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. We have another question here from Logan. It says, do you believe Trump's shift from traditional neoliberal U.S. policy will have prolonged impacts on the world, or do you believe things will eventually return to the way they were?
Okay. Well, it's been quite an entertaining 2 weeks of this new administration. I don't know if it's going to be sustainable. President Trump is doing a lot. I don't know if it's going to be sustainable for 4 years. I don't think so. But it's too soon to say how long it would last. I don't see going for trade wars for 4 years. It's not sustainable for anybody. Even the U.S. obviously it's the biggest market in the world. When you start getting inflation, your voters won't like that, or you start getting less support on a global scale on some issues, or you start missing some raw materials that you need for some types of industries. I mean, I don't think it's sustainable, but we'll have to see how long it lasts. For the time being, what we've seen is just the threat of increasing tariffs, for example, but they really haven't been executed yet. So we'll see. I'm following closely the situation with China because in the case of China, that's a sparring partner. China is the second largest economy. So definitely a trade war with China will have a very negative effect on both countries.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. We're getting more questions, and I think we do have a little bit of time. We have one from Sophia. It says, how will the current change in the U.S. administration affect our trade and trade globally? I believe she's referring to the U.S. directly. What should we expect to see in prices, and what changes globally outside of the U.S.? And you touched very briefly on inflation.
Yes.
And just before you start, I'd like to just follow up on what you said earlier about the threat of tariffs, not necessarily executing on the tariffs. I do believe that the current administration, hits hard first, scaring everybody, but their intentions are really seeking other concessions. And you brought the issue regarding Mexico about, stopping illegal immigration at the border, putting a bit more control on the cartels and the drug traffic and that. So I think what we're seeing right now is the current administration trying to use the scare tactic of tariffs. Doesn't mean that they won't use it. They would use it because I don't think they're just going to say something and then not execute on it if something happens. But I think they are getting the concessions that they want, and we probably won't see too much of a trade war, as you say. But we'll have to see how that plays out. So just going back to Sophia, she was basically saying, how will the current change in the U.S. administration affect our trade, U.S. trade, and trade globally?
So I think we're gonna see a little bit more of onshoring, and that's what President Trump is trying to do: bring more industry back into the U.S. He already said it. You don't want any tariffs, manufacture in the U.S. So in that regard, it's not a bad strategy. Onshoring is a very viable trade tactic. I mean, creates jobs, moves the economy. The question is, how efficient can you be manufacturing for example, in the U.S.? Where will you bring your raw materials from? Your labor? I mean, it's a great initiative, but on paper, I don't know if it's sustainable for all products. On the first week, we saw a huge announcement on artificial intelligence, a huge investment. And then China came up with an app that costs, I don't know, $20 million, and did basically the same as ChatGPT. And that created all types of noise in the AI sectors, industries. Even the stock market went down. So I don't have a crystal ball. It's very complicated times. But I agree with onshoring up to a point, if you can remain competitive. If not, then yeah, you start getting inflation. You start getting products that cost more. You have an increase in the prices of cost of living, and so on. So we will have to see where these tariffs and trade tactics really go.
Thank you. The people on that are connected are getting very, very, very active. A lot of questions coming up. I think we have time for one more, and then I'll go back to sort of my question that I'd like to ask you about, sort of a recommendation. but hopefully we can then and we'll talk to some of the coordinators here to see if we can answer some of these questions maybe later. But I have a question here from Michael. He says, "Do you understand the new U.S. administration's concern about the Chinese-run harbors in Panama, and what should Panama do now?"
So this is a very long answer. I'll try to summarize it. Just want to be clear, there's really no Chinese influence in the canal. And just to explain it very briefly, the Canal Authority operates separately from the government of Panama. It's a autonomous authority. The issue that the US has right now with the supposed presence of China in Panama is that there are two ports, one on the Atlantic and one on the Pacific, that are managed by a Hong Kong company. But I just want to be very specific on this. The ports have no incidence on the operations of the canal. Even the canal, they don't do the concessions of the ports. That's the government of Panama. When these concessions have been in place for more than 30 years, even when the US was managing the canal in Panama, and even before the China took Hong Kong from the United Kingdom. So when the companies establishing in Panama, these Hong Kong companies, they were under British regime. So you could say that initially they were British companies in the canal. The other ports are a mix between US and Panamanian companies. There's another one from Singapore, and there's another one from Taiwan. And just to add to my answer, this group, which is Hutchison Whampoa, they operate over 40 ports all over the world, in Europe, mostly in Europe. And you also have Chinese companies, can name one in Los Angeles, that manage port terminals. Chinese companies in mainland US, and there's no issues there. So we as Panamanians still are not very clear what's the issue here, and how we'll manage through the diplomatic channels. Obviously, it's basically David versus Goliath, but through diplomatic channels and through international law, the treaties are very clear that the Panama Canal is under Panamanian administration.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. And so we'll start wrapping it up because we've only got about 5 more minutes left. So parting words from you, what would you recommend in terms of skills, mindset, or experiences that you believe would be most valuable for students as they prepare to sort of launch their careers in the evolving landscape of international commerce?
Okay, I'm going to start with something very basic but very important. You need to learn a second language. It really doesn't matter if you want to learn Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese. It's important to at least know 2 languages, because on an international business world, you usually are going to use more than English, and it really helps if you understand at least a second language. If you ask me right now, what would be my preference? I would say Spanish, Portuguese, and maybe Chinese, just because of the amount of people that speak Spanish or Portuguese and Chinese. And in case of China, it's the second largest economy, and it will just keep growing. So that will be one of my recommendations. The second one will be, and I mentioned that in one of the previous questions, travel. The more you travel, the more you get out of your personal bubble and understand how the world functions. You grow both as a person, you grow culturally, and you learn how business is done on an international scale. It's also always a great topic of conversation in business meetings, where you've been, where you've traveled, where your international experience has taken you. If you have the opportunity to work abroad, take it. It's great to see how business is done outside of the US. If you don't have that opportunity, maybe get a job where you get to travel abroad, and then you get to experience on a smaller level or scale, but you still get to experience how they do business in other countries or in other regions of the world. And again, always think globally, but execute locally. And I'm just gonna give you an example from my hospitality experience here in Panama. I also own restaurant franchises. I own the Chuck E. Cheese's franchises and Buffalo Wild Wings. I remember about 10 years ago, in the US, salad bars are a huge thing, but not really that much in Panama. So that space that was used for a salad bar, I suggested to do a coffee area, coffee bar, with all types of coffees, frappuccinos, etc. And it was an immediate hit here in Panama. And the franchise adopted this concept, and it's now all over the world, in Latin America, and in Asia, and Europe, from an idea that was basically thought of here in Panama. So I will leave you with that thought.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Um, Really, it's been extremely insightful. So thank you for sharing all of your insights on the evolving landscape of global trade and business. Really, your experience navigating both the diplomatic sector and the private sector has really given the audience a valuable perspective on the challenges and some of the opportunities shaping the international commerce today. I'd also like to extend my gratitude to everybody who's joined us for this discussion. Your engagement and curiosity obviously make these conversations more impactful. So thank you very much. And finally, I would like to give a special thanks to the Center for Global Business for organizing the Global Impact Speaker Series and for their continued commitment to fostering global perspectives among students and professionals alike. It's been a real pleasure moderating this conversation, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue on these important issues in the future. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.
Thank you.